Greetings, fellow detectives. Wizard Kitten here, bringing you my review of the 31st mystery in the Nancy Drew series, Labyrinth of Lies. As usual, my reviews are based on 5 separate categories. Those categories are plot, characters, setting and design, entertainment and gameplay value, and music and vibe. Each of those categories is scored on a scale of 1 to 10, and then those scores are added up for a final total possible score out of 50, and then I assign a letter grade to each game as well. Just a quick warning before we start, this review will contain some mild plot spoilers, nothing major, but spoilers more related to things you might see in the promotional materials for the game, such as characters that you might interact with and places that you might go or things you might do. So, without further ado, let's get started with the plot of Labyrinth of Lies. So Nancy is in Greece for this mystery, and she is working at a museum called the Phidias, I think that's how you pronounce it, Phidias Cultural Center. So Nancy by now has kind of gotten a reputation for being pretty good with museums and archaeology. There's just kind of some natural mystery solving that goes along with that kind of expertise. So Nancy apprentices, essentially, or interns in that area quite a bit at this point in her career. So Nancy is at this museum in Greece helping out with the opening of a new exhibit when the director of the cultural center, Melina, tells her that essentially items from the collection have started to go missing. And at the same time that this exhibit is opening up, there is a theater troupe that is supposed to convey the exhibit through the medium of theater. So essentially, they are acting out the Greek myth of Persephone, the story of Persephone, and they are using items or replications of items from the exhibit themselves to actually promote the exhibit. So there's a possibility that these 4 members, who are the only people that we interact with physically in the game, so we know it has to be one of them, there's a possibility that somebody is actually stealing the art and being dishonest with it, which is Nancy's job to find out. That's essentially what ends up happening. So the plot of this mystery is interesting because we have that original plot where Nancy comes to Greece to help out with the museum opening, and then it seems like somebody's stealing the art, so then she needs to figure out who is doing that. And then everything is kind of wrapped around this overarching umbrella of Greek mythology. So Nancy spends a great deal of time learning about Greek mythology, kind of working in the museum a little bit and helping out with the exhibit, talking to characters who are, again, acting in this play. She helps them out kind of with the play. She eventually makes it down to the set, which kind of almost has its own different feel. We'll talk about the set a little bit more. But there's just a lot going on with the plot. And I think overall, the plot had a really interesting idea, but it had average to poor execution. So I like the idea of an art heist. I like the idea of art being stolen and Nancy needs to figure out who's doing it. That sounds pretty straightforward and exciting. But when we think about the backstories of the characters, everything starts to feel really forced and as though we don't actually have enough information to understand their motivations. So it's really hard to start figuring out, well, who could be the culprit? Why could they be the culprit? Figuring out motives is really difficult with this. And also the actual execution of the heist itself, it just ends up being so complicated that it overshadows the reason for its actual existence, which is this is a mystery for Nancy to solve. I feel like the motive would have been so much more interesting to explore for the characters instead of Nancy figuring out how this heist is being accomplished, because it's extremely convoluted. And if you've played the game, I'm curious to see if that's what you think as well. Did it feel very complicated to you? Because that's how it felt to me, for sure. Another big problem that I have with the plot is that we find out what is happening almost a full hour of gameplay and maybe more than an hour of gameplay depending on how fast you are with the puzzles before the actual ending of the mystery. And honestly, I think the ending is what really diminishes the plot for me, because the mystery starts out honestly pretty solid and fun. I enjoy being in the museum and putting together the exhibit and kind of interviewing the theater actors, and everything starts to roll downhill at the midpoint of the mystery until we kind of crash a bit at the end. I don't like knowing who the culprit is and then being forced to complete a ton of puzzles before I can do anything about it. It makes the end feel very drawn out, and it makes it lose any adrenaline that it could have had. The thrill wears off really quickly, which honestly comes down to the timing of the climax in this mystery. It's far too early and ruins a majority of the experience at the beginning. Because again, I think the beginning of the mystery is really fun, the middle is like okay, and then the ending is just like, why? It ends up being so complicated. We figure things out, but it just feels so forced, and I hate figuring out the answer so early and then not being able to do anything about it. There's no sense of urgency, because Nancy's wandering around essentially for an hour before we get to win this mystery. It really ends up just kind of being disappointing. I think this mystery had a lot of potential for the plot, but there was just the execution could have been better. So overall, I have to give the plot for this mystery a 7 out of 10. So next, let's move on to characters. So we have 4 physical characters in this game. We have Niobe, who is an artist, and as part of the theater troupe, part of her job is to make the reproductions of the items in the exhibits for the actors to use as props in the play for advertising purposes. We have, and she's playing Demeter in the play, the mother of Persephone. Xenia is kind of the leader of the theater troupe. She's the director. She's, I think, the writer. And she is playing Persephone, so she's starring in the show as well. We have Grigor, who plays Hermes, the Greek god of essentially sending messages, the deliverer in the Greek god world, in the Olympian world. And he kind of runs the behind-the-scenes stuff, a lot of the lighting and the set manipulation. And then there's Thanos, who is playing Hades, god of the underworld, and is just very gruff. And he doesn't really seem to have another job besides being gruff. He spends all of his time in the underworld, he rarely comes up, and he's like always in character, or it seems like he's always in character. We have a couple phone friends. We can talk to the Hardy Boys. We can talk to Melina, who brought us in and was the director at the museum, who we never get to meet in person, but she would have been at the museum if these missing jewelry pieces hadn't happened. So, for characters, again, I think there was a lot of potential here, and I really like the inspiration for all of the characters. But I feel like everything was way too heavy-handed. I do appreciate that all of the characters have backstories. I usually really like that, but the backstories for all of these characters are so dramatic that it takes away a lot of the realism that I like to see in the Nancy Drew games. And the backstories aren't necessarily explained. It's the mood of the backstory that we get, but we don't get a lot of specific details, so their backstories feel so very dramatic, but also incomplete, which makes them honestly feel kind of silly. I really like when I'm playing these games to be able to imagine that these characters are real, because then it makes the mystery feel a lot more important to me, but I couldn't do that with this game. I mean, Thanos speaks in grunts and heavy-handed dramatic poems. Nobody does that. Like, Xenia speaks in cryptic proclamations of doom, essentially. Nobody does that. And Niobe uses flowery metaphors every time you talk to her. Nobody does that. Grigor also is just way too good at coming up with one-liners and clever little quips at the drop of the hat. Some people can do that, but very few. You have to be like a professional comedian in order to be able to do that. All of these characters, I guess, just end up feeling so written. They don't feel natural, they don't feel real, they don't feel complete, they feel kind of fake. And that takes me out of the mystery. It takes me out of the joy of solving this mystery, because I'm not connecting to these characters, they're just there. And they feel like I'm reading a novel where everything is just really forced and the plot is just too obvious, and it's just not fun to interact with them anymore. It would be fun if there was more meaning behind it, but I think all we get is the drama and none of the follow-through, which is a bit disappointing for me. So honestly, I have to give characters for this mystery a 6 out of 10. Now we're going to move on to setting and design, which takes into account where this game takes place and how that is integrated into the overall mystery. So, as I mentioned, Nancy goes to Greece for this mystery, and the Phidias Cultural Center is awesome. I really like how the museum was laid out. I think it's beautiful. I think it feels very natural and realistic. I like how the workshop is laid out, but the other part of this setting, and kind of the major part of the setting, at least half, if not more, of the mystery takes place in the actual sets for the theater troupe, the sets that will be used for the play, which is supposed to only run 1 week. And I don't want to give too much away, but these sets are ridiculous. They're beautiful, they're really pretty, they look really cool, but they are ridiculous, and I cannot possibly fathom in what world they would be possible. They are so complicated, so complex, so detailed, they would be ridiculously expensive. And anyone who's ever done theater, I'm a theater person, anyone who has done theater knows that putting together sets takes a lot of time and a lot of resources and a lot of skill. And the way that these sets are put together is just impossible. No one would invest that kind of time and money in sets like that, especially for a show that's only going to run 1 week. The reason for it in the mystery is given that it's an experimental stage. It's this company that's trying out a new thing for theater sets. But it's just ridiculous. It's not at all believable. It's not at all functional. It would never happen in real life. While I'm willing to suspend reality for these games to a certain extent, this just blows way past my line of expectation. In previous games, there are things that's like, well, okay, that's like not very realistic, but I'm okay with it. I'm willing to suspend it because I know this is a game. This is just distracting. There had to be a better way to do this. Even a theme park kind of setting would have made much more sense, and that's only been done once in the series. That's only been done in the Haunted Carousel, and we didn't get to explore the actual theme park itself as much. So this would have been a great opportunity to bring that idea back and execute it more fully, and then it wouldn't have felt as forced. I just can't bring myself to be okay with these sets as a theater person. There is no way, even a professional theater would never have stuff like this. There's no possible way. Even if the company donated it to every theater, they would go out of business because nobody would be paying for it, and nobody would be able to pay for it even if they kind of tried it out with this show and then decided to start selling it to other theaters. No theater would be able to afford this. They are so extravagant. They're so ridiculous. I just can't bring myself to get past it. They're beautiful. I really like the museum, which is why I'm not going to crash my setting and design scores too much. They do definitely convey Greece to me. A lot of the Greek mythology is conveyed. It's very cool, but again, not realistic and to a distracting point. If it wasn't distracting, if they were just like normal sets, I would be totally fine with it, but this is just ridiculous. So honestly, I have to give setting and design another 6 out of 10. Next, we move on to entertainment and gameplay value, which considers how fun the game is to play and how fun it is to replay. This is always one that I feel very conflicted about, because when the mystery starts, I'm having a pretty good amount of fun. Like, I'm really enjoying the mystery. I think I really like being around the museum, and I like solving some of the puzzles in there. I like doing some of the administrative work, even though it's not really solving the mystery. I mean, they're simple enough that you can get through them. But by the time we get to the middle of the mystery and the end of the mystery, it stops being fun for me. And that's really disappointing. This is another very puzzle-heavy game. So if you really like puzzles and you love puzzle-heavy games, then this is going to be a really fun one for you. I am okay with puzzles. I love puzzles, as long as they justify their existence. I don't mind them being difficult either, but there needs to be a reason for them. If they are there simply to make the game longer, then they're silly. Particularly when you imagine the purpose of a theater set. Why would there be puzzles strewn throughout theater sets? Theater sets are meant to be quick, functional, pretty, and accessible for the actors. You need to be able to move through them quickly and efficiently, and you need to actually be able to move the sets. In no way, shape, or form would theater sets ever have locks, puzzles, codes, complicated devices, fire, poisonous water, lava. In no way would that ever be a thing. Again, I just can't bring myself to be okay with these puzzles, especially since they distract from the overall plot. It's very similar to the setting because the theater sets, have so many puzzles. That's really what feels like the purpose of them. And when Nancy actually sees the theater show going on, they aren't using the sets. What's the point of them if you're not even using any of them? Like the Wi-Fi puzzle at the end, the seed puzzle that you use to unlock the door, the judge's puzzle with a hidden compartment, like none of these could or should ever exist. The puzzles within the museum, those are great, those are fun. There's a reason for them, which is that Nancy originally comes to the museum as an intern. They're meaningful. Doing vases and helping Niobe make some of the art, some of the reproductions, that's fun and that makes sense. All of those others on the theater sets, no. 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 I'm trying to think of a world in which that would be okay, but it's just distracting. Again, it's just really silly, and it takes a lot of the fun out of the game for me when I'm sitting down there trying to solve this puzzle, even though I know who the culprit is, and I've been sitting down here for an hour, and it's really frustrating, and I just want to move on. It takes away the fun, which is disappointing. But thankfully, if this game didn't have the beginning, my scores would all be much lower. But because the beginning of this mystery is fun, it averages out. So for me, I give this game, for entertainment and gameplay value, a 7 out of 10. Finally, we move on to music and vibe, which considers the music of the game and the overall vibe and how that's conveyed. So the music in this game is awesome. It's music that sounds undeniably Greek, and I love it. I love that they are able to use instruments that sound that transport me to that country, that make me feel like I am there. I love that. I think that's super cool. And I think there's really awesome integration of Greek culture and myths into the overall mystery itself. I do end up learning a lot from this mystery, which is always fun. It's a nice refresher in Greek mythology. It's really cool. The vibe that they're going for, which is essentially that the drama of Greek mythology can ingratiate itself into every life, that's conveyed pretty well. It definitely feels dramatic. That's the vibe that they're going for. They want everything to feel almost like a play. Life is a play. Life is dramatic, just like these characters, which is why they hardly ever break character. Which actually is my one problem, because I feel like that drama, that vibe is conveyed a little too much. I find it really hard to connect with the characters when they never break character. Thanos, Xenia, and Grigor act like their characters throughout like 90% of the mystery. They're acting like Hades, they're acting like Persephone, they're acting like Hermes. So like during those rare moments when they're actually being themselves, it breaks that vibe and it pulls me out of the moment. If there was more of a balance, I think the vibe then could have been perfect. I think it would have been a lot more meaningful that way. But as of right now, that takes away from the mystery, the vibe a little bit for me. So while I think it's pretty successful overall, I do have to give it a 9 out of 10. So now if we add up all of our scores for this mystery, we have a 7 for plot, 6 for characters, 6 for setting and design, 7 for entertainment and gameplay value, and 9 for music and vibe, which gives us a total score of 35 and a final grade of a C. Very average, right in the middle. Now, as far as the other Nancy Drew games go, this is definitely one that I have ranked a little bit lower. And I think that's because a lot of the execution and a lot of the ideas just do not follow through. There's a lot of things that could have gone really well for me that didn't. I think there are things in this mystery, though, that would stand out to a lot of detectives and would be really enjoyable to a lot of detectives. If you like history, particularly Greek mythology, I think you'll love this mystery. If you love puzzles, I think you'd love this mystery. If you like drama, I think you'll probably love this mystery. But if you are like me and you really enjoy a really nicely connected story, if you really enjoy characters that you can connect with, If you really enjoy a mystery that you feel like could happen and you could be there and you could actually solve it as Nancy, there's real stakes, then this mystery might not hit all of the bullet points for you, like it does for me. It ends up being very average. Do I recommend that you play it? Yeah. I mean, there's definitely positive points to it. I think there are some fun parts to it. It's by no means a failure of a Nancy Drew game. I would not say that, but it's just not quite as strong as some of the others, in my opinion. Again, there are a lot of things that might work really well for a lot of detectives, but for me, there's just too many logistical things that went wrong. But overall, 35 out of 50, average, a C, not too bad. Thank you for listening to this review, fellow detectives. I do hope you enjoyed it. Please let me know what you think in the comments down below. I'd be very curious to hear your thoughts and opinions on this mystery. Please also feel free to like and subscribe to get some more Nancy Drew content. Thank you for watching. I will see you soon.